Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, desolate serfs, peasants, vassals, Kurds. I'm a useful idiot. Today I want to talk about this epic struggle in northern Syria between Kurdistan and the Kurds in Syria and Al-Qaeda, or Al-Nusra Front, as they're known in Syria. And as you would suspect, it's getting no airplay in the Western press that I can see anyway. But a few things came out immediately after the reports of a massacre. I'll attach that video below. So now we have the president of the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, Mossad Barzani, and he said that he will use all capabilities to defend Kurdish civilians who are under threat in Syria. And he also called for investigations into reports of these massacres, and pretty dramatic, insinuating that the Kurdish government of the northern region of Iraq would possibly militarily intervene on behalf of Kurds in Syria. And coming from Kurdistan, that's a pretty substantial threat, because a lot of people don't know that the Peshmerga, or the military wing, or the army of Kurdistan, is 200,000 strong. And they're also pretty well armed with heavy weaponry. They captured over 2,000 armored vehicles from the Iraqis during that last war. And they managed to hang on to them. And most of their weapons seem to come from either Iraq or by way of Soviet Union. So anyway, the Peshmerga, or Kurdistan army, is something to be reckoned with. And so this is not a statement to be taken lightly. Interestingly enough, the statements also referred to the area in Syria as Western Kurdistan. Something interesting to note. And why wouldn't he? And then we also have, interestingly enough, the Iranian Kurdish fighters said they would be deployed in Syria to help establish an autonomous region near the Turkish border. And they're called the Party of Free Life in Kurdistan. And they're essentially the Iranian branch of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK. And one noted member of the Iranian Kurdish group said, quote, "This calls for collective stand from the rest of Kurdistan to help their brothers in Syria," unquote. And that puts it pretty succinctly, and what we could have expected in this situation. So we have Kurds all over the region uniting to support their Kurdish brothers in Syria. And this is about as predictable as anything could be. And why wouldn't it be? So now we also have Kurdish forces, or Kurdish sources, I should say, have confirmed that Kurdish Syria is already being reinforced by the PKK from both Turkey and Iraq. And that's something we also could have taken for granted, especially since we had a lot of PKK move out of Turkey and back into Iraq. And now they are going to help defend villagers in Syria. And the Kurds in Syria, just like the Kurds elsewhere, are very organized and were already ready for a certain amount of autonomy. Even though they've been oppressed in Syria, like in so many other countries, like Turkey, they still managed to keep their own systems together. And they have Kurdish militias in Syria, and they're called the YPG. And there's some question of how many there is, somewhere between 1,500 and 15,000. And the Kurds do not have an outside benefactor for weapons, but they managed to get them. As one Kurdish militia member said, quote, "There's no problem getting arms. This is the Middle East. It's the biggest arm market you can find. When it comes to money, we just get support from the people." So as you would imagine, there's plenty of arms to be had in the region, and they just get their family money together and buy the weapons that they need. And even though we have the Kurdish militia in Syria, the YPG, operating, we also have a number of Kurds that are being trained in Kurdistan in Iraq. There was a report that came out in July where Barzani admitted that the Kurdish government in northern Iraq was already training Kurdish Syrian fighters who will potentially be sent back into Syria. And he said they hadn't been sent back in yet because they were intended to be deployed to fill any kind of security vacuum when the Syrian forces have retreated. But since the Syrian forces have pretty much retreated, and now we have an Al-Qaeda zone in the north, then I would imagine that a lot of these militia that are trained in northern Iraq are going to go back into Syria. And so there's going to be a substantial increase in the military strength of the Kurdish region in Syria. And in fact, tens of thousands of Syrian Kurds have fled from Syria into Iraqi Kurdistan. So there's any number of upwards of thousands of young Kurds and old Kurds who will be trained in Iraq and then sent back in to Syria. And Kurds make up nearly 10% of the population of Syria, so they got a pretty substantial presence and population as it is. And also what makes things fairly complicated for the Kurds in Syria is that a large percentage of Syria's oil are centered up in regions of Syria that the Kurds live on. And so that's another reason why there's a power struggle going on for that region, I am sure. And there was an Erbil agreement which created a Erbil agreement, which created the Kurdish Supreme Committee. And that's a governing body that oversees all the Kurdish territories in Syria. And they're the ones that set up these People's Protection Units, or YPG. And I find that pretty interesting that they've already set up a governing body for their territory in Syria. And once again, if you take all these autonomous Kurdish governments in all these 4 different countries that you find Kurdistan split up into, the foundations will be laid should they want to make their move for their own country at some point. But anyway, I don't want to bring that up again right now because that's certainly far in the future. But to give you an idea of what the international community is saying, Russian Foreign Ministry statement from last July said, quote, "In these areas there has long been confrontation between the troops of the international extremists affiliated with Al-Qaeda and local Kurdish militias who stood up to protect their homes from attacks by radical extremists," unquote. So here we have the shoe on the other foot now. It's the United States that's supporting Al-Qaeda extremists who are now attacking Kurds in Syria. And we have Russia taking the stance and making it obvious that they are against Al-Qaeda and they are very supportive of the Kurds. And but at the very heart of what's going on in northern Syria is the whole idea of declaring an Islamic State in the north. And that seems to be the goal of Al-Qaeda at this point. And the Kurdish enclave is a thorn in their side. But at the same token, should the Kurds end up finding themselves in a position to move towards independent state as a result of being surrounded by Al-Qaeda, then this is going to be very problematic for Turkey, because that would be their worst nightmare, to have an independent Kurdistan on the other side of the border from their Kurdish region that they've had all these struggles with for all these years. So anyway, very, very complicated situation, and very, very complicated, not the least of which is by what Iraq and Turkey both have at stake with further struggles of Kurds in their region. Because none of these countries want to see any more independence in Kurds, but historical events could unfold to make these things happen. And that's what I've suggested in previous videos of the region. So one of the things that makes this all the more interesting. And so there we have it, a showdown between Al-Qaeda and the Kurds. And as suspected, all the Kurds in the entire region are mobilizing and pledging their support for their Kurdish brothers in Syria. And the Al-Qaeda really wants to tangle with the Kurds, then they are going to be in some serious trouble. I'm Useful Idiot. Don't you be one too.